Welcome to Adventist News and Views, your video source for the latest information and insights shaping the Adventist conversation, brought to you by Spectrum. Here are the highlights of this week. Köhler has been elected as the 21st General Conference President, marking the end of Ted Wilson's 15-year leadership. Tensions flared on day one of the GC session as Western delegates reignited the vaccine debate. Spectrum Board Chair examines its ongoing exclusion from official GC exhibit spaces. The Association of Adventist Women honored 3 groundbreaking leaders in medicine, engineering, and ministry. A reflection on the GC session mixes lament and longing. All that, plus Spectrum latest journal spotlight and our video of the week featuring Chris Blake's book, Imagine Life, launched at the Spectrum Lounge in St. Louis. On July 4, 2025, Carlos Köhler was elected as the 21st president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, ending Ted Wilson's 15-year tenure in a decisive shift that marked the close of nearly 3 decades of Wilson family influence. In a closed-door session of the General Conference Nominating Committee, Köhler secured 170 votes to Wilson's 104 after hours of spirited debate that moved from institutional preservation to the need for fresh leadership. Emerging as a consensus choice from a diverse slate that included Paul Douglas, Artur Stelle, and Pardon Mwanza, Köhler's nomination was later confirmed by 90.15% of delegates, making him the first GC president from the Global South, the youngest in over 30 years, and the first Brazilian to hold the role. Köhler brings with him a complex legacy shaped by his years as executive secretary of the General Conference and, before that, president of the South American Division, where he was known for consolidating authority, resisting women's ordination, and promoting conservative Adventist lifestyle standards. While his tenure brought structural discipline and a highly active Pathfinder ministry, it also saw significant youth membership losses and allegations of misused church resources. Still, his election signals both continuity and change, an effort to preserve core values while shifting tone. In brief remarks following the vote, Köhler expressed gratitude, emphasized unity, and pledged to move forward in faith. The opening day of the 2025 General Conference session was marked by heated debate as Western delegates pushed to revisit the Church's 2015 immunization statement, arguing that its reference to peer-reviewed scientific literature elevated science above Scripture. The motions to amend the agenda were ultimately defeated after GC President Ted Wilson defended the statement and urged delegates to stay focused on mission. Delegates from the Global South overwhelmingly rejected the relevance of the vaccine debate, viewing it as a Western preoccupation that distracts from evangelism and core priorities. The episode highlighted deep regional divides in the Global Adventist Church over governance, authority, and mission focus. As the 2025 General Conference session draws to a close, 8 women have been appointed to high-level leadership roles across the Seventh-day Adventist Church, signaling both progress and the persistent underrepresentation of women in top governance. Among them are Audrey Anderson, re-elected as General Vice President, Alyssa Truman, the incoming Communication Director, and Lisa Beardsley-Hardy, continuing as Education Director. Other leaders include Galina Stelle, Orathai Cherson, Evelise Herrera, Judy Glass, and Robin Kajura. Collectively, these women bring decades of service, academic excellence, and global experience, underscoring the vital influence of female leadership within a church still grappling with gender equity at its highest levels. Other major appointments, including division leaders and GC department directors, can be found on our website, spectrummagazine.org. At a special reception on July 6 during the 2025 GC session, the Association of Adventist Women honored 3 trailblazing women, Dr. Wanda Phipatanakul, Pastor Anathasi Nda, and engineer Pat Kopel, for their groundbreaking contributions in their respective fields. The evening also included a Champion of Justice Award for theologian Dr. Darius Jankowicz, recognizing his advocacy for women's ordination and church reform. Hosted in St. Louis, the event featured music, devotionals, and powerful reflections celebrating women's equality and leadership in the church, affirming AAW's continued mission to support women's full participation in Adventist ministry and life. In Spectrum at the Border, Carmen Lau reflects on the publication's ongoing exclusion from official exhibit spaces at the 2025 General Conference session in St. Louis, despite holding press credentials, and traces this pattern of marginalization back to Spectrum's public solidarity with LGBTQ+ Adventists. Drawing on personal experiences at past GC sessions, Lau recalls both hostility and quiet moments of grace shared with figures like kinship president Floyd Painitz and grieving church members. Despite repeated rejection, Spectrum continues to occupy the church's physical and ideological margins, embracing the belief that Jesus, too, walks at the edges where the excluded are seen, welcomed, and loved. In his reflective essay, St. Louis Blues and Views, theologian Sigve Tonstad offers a personal, virtual perspective on the 2025 General Conference session, marked by both disappointment and hope. He expresses pain over Spectrum's exclusion from the exhibit hall, despite its long-standing contribution to Adventist thought, and sadness at the all-male slate of newly elected division presidents, which he sees as a missed opportunity for gender inclusion. Tonstad also critiques the session's heavy focus on procedural details at the expense of deeper theological engagement, calling instead for urgent attention to neglected topics like the Sabbath as divine commitment, the faithfulness of Christ in Paul's writings, and a richer reading of Revelation 14:12. His blues reflect institutional stagnation, while his views urge a revival of serious Adventist scholarship rooted in mission, justice, and grace. Be sure to check out these and other stories that are shaping the Adventist conversation on our website at spectrummagazine.org. Spectrum Journal Spotlight. Check out our latest journal pieces featuring in-depth analysis and thoughtful reflections on faith, theology, and contemporary issues. And finally, our video of the week features Chris Blake's Imagine Life. Watch the interview, reading, and audience Q&A from our lounge in St. Louis.
Good evening, everybody. I tend to deal with stress by taking action. And one of the ways I take action is by writing. And so when January hit this year, I was wondering how I could respond around, January 21st or so. And one way was to write. I had sort of planned this book, but it coalesced, especially around that time. And so this is a book of hope and energy and promise and purpose and resistance too, because sometimes we look around and we wonder, what can I do? And part of what's in the book is, please don't try to change the world, change your world. Otherwise you go mad. Change your world and let the ripples widen. So this is a little bit of my changing my world, and thank you for being part of my world tonight. I'm going to honor my wife, Yolanda, sitting over here as well. Yes, that's good. Yes, she deserves every bit of that applause, living with me, especially during the last few months when I was cranking on this. One day I wrote for 16 hours straight. Anyway, thanks.
So I really like what you said there about change your world. And I feel like for me, growing up Adventist, you were present in a space that I could read, Insight Magazine. Then later on, I heard about you as a beloved professor at Union, connected to an Amnesty International chapter. That was fascinating to me, that a professor would care about social action. And I think, can you maybe reflect on both of those as you think about your world and your space? What you're talking about in this book, in that kind of inspiration for local action, how has it played out? What lessons are you sharing with us in your book based on those experiences?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm a convert. I became a Seventh-day Adventist Christian when I was 24. after graduating from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. And now Yolanda and I are back in San Luis Obispo. A beautiful place with the best climate on the planet. And it's good to be back there. Yolanda has been a Seventh-day Adventist most of her life. And during her senior year in high school, she started dating a sweaty heathen. And you know nothing good can come from that, right? But as it turns out, something good did come from it in my life anyway. And part of what drew me into the Adventist church is it made so much sense to me. I was already a non-combatant during the Vietnam War. I was already a vegetarian before I became an Adventist. And I like to tell people that I'm actually 93 years old, but the Adventist health message has helped me to look like this, and I owe it all to Fried Chick. I especially appreciated, though, the emphasis on a loving God. And especially what's really central to my faith is that a loving God will not fry people forever. That drew me, and it still captures me. And I also believe in this God who reaches people through real life. And God becoming, love with skin on it was ennobling, that thought. So when I became an editor of Insight, there are a lot of stories that come to mind. But one of them was about the second month I was there at the Review, Review and Herald Publishing Association.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. R.I.P. Insight. I attended a funeral of a young man who had committed suicide. I don't even like to say committed. I'm searching for a better verb there because it sounds like a crime, who had decided to take his life. I think that's better. Words matter. And it was held in the multi-purpose room. It was held in the cafeteria. And I sat there, and he was the son of a man who was a copy editor who became a dear friend of mine. And I thought, why did this happen? Why would this young man, 19 years old, take his life? And what came to me was he lacked hope. I think that's incredibly important. So I wanted, during my tenure of 8 years at Insight, to give hope. And hope shows up in all sorts of forms, and some of them are false hopes, of course. But that hope, I wanted to translate that and to get it into real life. So that also characterized what I wanted to bring as a university professor. And so, the Amnesty International Club then became Amnesty Tiny Hands International, because Tiny Hands fights, that used to be the name, fought sex trafficking, especially in Nepal, in India on the border. And so we did fundraising. We sent students over there to Nepal, and that organization saved 140 girls every month from a life of horror. And that interacting to bring hope and freedom to people has always been extraordinarily, it seems to me, important. to followers of Jesus. And I'm one of those.
Yeah. For those who read Spectrum, we have a student of Chris's on our staff, Natalie Bruzon, our weekend editor, web producer. When you look at the activism that you've tried to encourage, whether at Insight Magazine, so I'm kind of thinking hope and action is something I think of when I think of you. And when you think of the things that you did for students to inspire them, again, to turn their hope, making sure they had a reason to do something, why do you care about action? In the Adventist church, there is action focused on replication, more mission, members, growth, good. When you're thinking about action, you're thinking about something different. What are you inspired by to take action, and why have you tried to do so many things, including the Just Love Collective, to get things happening?
Yeah, short answer is Jesus. That's why. And Jesus is an activist. Jesus, when I came to Insight, I was asked this question: are you a conservative or a liberal? And I thought about it for a moment, and then I said, I am a conservative radical with liberal applications. And I watched the glaze come over their eyes, and I thought that'll probably work. I see that Jesus is that. Radical meaning getting to the root of things. Never an extremist, always a radical. And the conservative is good. We ought to conserve things that are good and matter, and to be applied liberally is what we're about. So taking action, to me, I believe in righteousness by love more than righteousness by faith, because it involves action. Also because Jesus believed in that, and Paul and John, Peter, a few others. But because the righteousness by love phrase doesn't appear, somehow we get into believing that what we believe matters more than how we live. That is a fallacy. So getting back to what really motivates us is love. And love is action. Love is something that you can see and hear and feel, which is what John says in his first epistle: what we have seen and heard and felt, we bring to you. And so that's, I think, what we're about. And I'm hoping that this book brings that about. Spectrum does. Just Love Collective is a collaboration of Adventist activists. And our motto is uniting hearts, inspiring action. We want to collaborate and bring all these disparate, progressive, especially elements of Adventism together, and then create action that is liberating and loving.
Yeah, that's great. I have to say, when you said the conservative, radical, liberal applications, it reminded me that one of your sons wrote an article in the Journal just about the time that Obama was running for president. I think he went on to help on that campaign. But he made that point. He said that Jesus was a radical, and that was such a great article. And I know I know Jeff even more, and these are two great human beings. Yolanda gets most of the credit,
absolutely,
of course.
Yes.
But you have produced two sons that really do this in their work. So if I think about your career, and this is the last question, then we'll do a reading.
Yeah.
I see, if you're watching like the James Bond movie of Chris Blake's career, there's like a dotted line from the West Coast. It goes over to the GC, and then it goes to Lincoln, Nebraska, and then it goes back to SLO.
Yeah.
We're here in, GC has come to St. Louis, and we're experiencing it.
Yeah.
You said you like to get political. So I wanted, if you could help us, because, we're thinking about the politics of the church. This is the church in action.
Yes.
In many ways, in more ways than one. And there's some things that are hopeful here, but there's some things that are discouraging. I don't know, was it all hopeful when you were there back in the day? Can you maybe help us think about the institutional church? And you're still a member?
Yeah.
You were a minister?
I pastored.
Yes.
5 years. Yeah.
So why remain an Adventist? How do you find hope in this, in the bureaucracy, in the evident bureaucracy? Wonderful people, dedicated people. There's something beautiful about it. Where do you find hope in that, and where do you think it should go?
Yeah. There's a chapter in my book here titled "All Religion is Local." It's based on the premise you might have heard before: all politics is local. All politics is about people talking with one another, and also the local effect of what happens between our ears, our two ears. All religion is local. And in that chapter, I talk about the upside-down kingdom. How often we consider the General Conference at the top of the pyramid. In reality, it is the local church that's at the top of the pyramid. That's the upside-down kingdom. That's where the goodness happens. And there are a lot of fine people working at the General Conference. One of them is here today. Yeah, he's a friend of mine. And we have chatted about things happening. And I'm glad he's there on the inside doing his Nicodemus thing. So I have great respect for it. It's also the case that when you look at the list in 1 Corinthians 12, Paul says, first we have, and then he goes down the list, and right toward the bottom, right before tongues, you have administrators, just above tongues. And so I kind of take that literally. Yeah, I was asked to be an administrator quite a few times. I said, no, I'm not ready to step down yet. Now, there are quite a few administrators in this room right here who've done wonderful work. And that local interaction is what really gives me hope. When I see the climate change, no matter what anybody has decided, for the good, for courageous, liberating action, that's wonderful. That gives me hope. And, little things matter. Yeast and seeds and a cup. And Jesus is talking about the little things that matter. So those things really give me hope.
Well, great. Well, let's have you read a little bit. You have some selections picked out, and then we'll go to questions. So prep your questions here. There's, I think, more thoughts that we haven't covered from Chris, so we want to unpack those.
So the cover of this book has 10 words. Well, it has more than 10 words, but there's a list of 10 words on it. Oh, there it is. It's hard to read probably. And they're next to Imagine Life, joy, freedom, hope, church, grace, peace, justice, courage, creativity, and love. I showed this to a friend of mine, and he said, well, yeah, that pretty much covers it. And I said, well, good. I'm glad. The cover is also, I wanted a blue cover on my book. This is designed by a former student, Afilandra Messer, and a designer, lead designer at Hallmark Cards now, making much more than I ever made in my life. And we talked about, well, actually, I said I wanted to have a blue cover, and so I was looking at the Northern Lights for a while, but it seemed a little dreary as I looked at it as a cover. And then I was looking at Hubble Space Telescope. It was too much, it seemed like, for the cover. And so I went microscopic, and I found this blue vein leaf. And I thought, yeah, let's do that. And Affy, as I call her, Affy said, yeah, let's do it. Then she added the gold band to it, which was nice. I like that. I'm only going to read one selection because the night is going to wear on. And if you want to buy your book and fall asleep while reading it, that's your choice. But I'm just going to read one. I'll say a little bit about the selections. There are in this book film reviews. There are film reviews of films that many people have not seen. Indie films, for example. I used to teach critiquing film at Union. And, for example, Wajda. How many of you have seen Wajda? Okay? Yeah. If you saw it.
Because of your book.
Right. Okay. So Wajda is about a spirited 10-year-old girl in Saudi Arabia. The film is directed by a woman. She's the only woman who has ever shot a film in Saudi Arabia. And there are no theaters in Saudi Arabia. And so she directed it from the back of a van. She couldn't be seen on the street. And she's giving directions to the actors from the van. It's a marvelous film. There's Wajda. There is the film Loving. Probably some of you have seen Loving. Yeah, a little less than 2. Yeah, I know you saw it because you read my book. It's. I mean, there are 7 of them, and there are also some statements that I helped to write, or I did write. And there's even a piece from Spectrum blog.
Oh, great!
An interaction that I had called "The Hiddenness of God," with atheists and agnostics. And the question was that I asked on the site, because people are taking pot shots at God. Why doesn't God step in? And I asked the question that I often ask, and that is, how could God do it better? You play defense. And so for 12 days, we went after it. And if you read that section, you can see there's some forceful counter-arguments going on. How could God do it better? Why is God so hidden? That's the longest article in the book. There are articles that are sort of humorous. I have friends who would underline the sort of. There are articles that I draw from my experiences. I like to do that. And I used to tell my writing students, the way to make your writing inimitable is if you share from your life. And then it becomes unique and gains power as well. Some of them are like biographies, short biographies of people doing wonderful things in this world, hopeful things. But I'm going to read this one It's just called Beware the Joy Robbers. And it's in the section Imagine Joy. And there are 5 points to it. And it includes some of what I've just been talking about here. I think that, well, I hope it brings you joy. How about that? Beware the joy robbers. In her classic song, Big Yellow Taxi, Joni Mitchell sings the chorus, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot." I know you're grateful I didn't sing that. It is possible to go through life feeling that we're missing out, that the joy is gone, that we're basically driving around in an empty parking lot. Yeah, come on in and have a seat. I felt that way before myself. The day my father died of cancer at age 58, I spotted a few people laughing on a street corner and thought, what are they laughing about? Nothing is funny today. How many of you ever felt that when something like that happened? Yeah? How many of you won't raise your hand no matter what I say? Would you? Thank you. Appreciate that. Some people go through much of their lives feeling that way. Because of deep trauma, unremitting pain, chronic depression, or a host of other reasons, the joy is gone. What? Joy robbers appear in multiple disguises. 4, Anxiety 5, and dread are joy robbers. Yeah. Rage and frustration are joy robbers. Loneliness and sorrow are joy robbers. Envy and jealousy are joy robbers. Too little time and too darn much to do are joy robbers. Even well-meaning people, friends and family, educators and pastors, can be joy robbers. When joy is gone, it can be difficult to retrieve. We also know that many people who have suffered profoundly, from Helen Keller to Nelson Mandela to Malala Yousafzai, are brimming with joy. It is a delight and inspiration to listen to them. Joy is a bridge over troubled water. Joy is stronger than despair, deeper than happiness, brighter than any dark circumstance. As followers of Jesus, we are promised that we will have joy. At the heart of the actual Lord's Prayer in John 17, that's where the Lord's Prayer is. In Jesus' last conversation with his disciples before his death, he explains, "These things I speak to the world, that they may have joy fulfilled in themselves." In my Bible, where it reads, "They," I have drawn a line to the margin and written my name. You can do the same in your Bible with your name. As always, we need to be practical. Vague exhortations are insufficient. Here are 5 ways followers of Jesus spark, stoke, and sustain joy. First, we take rejuvenating, cleansing breaks. Recently, as I was vacuuming our house, the vacuum cleaner lacks power and effectiveness. When people don't like something, they will sometimes say, "That sucks." Well, the problem was my vacuum didn't suck. I kept rolling it back and forth over the same piece of lint without success. I thought, that's odd. Then it struck me what might be wrong. I turned off the machine, opened the canister. The bag was totally full. Everything works better if it's rebooted occasionally, including human beings. Imagine you're a painter and you complete a job, leaving your paintbrush thick with paint. You put it away to be used again. Next time you paint, the brush is still full of old paint. Every time you paint, you start with the old sticky paint on the hardened brush, how good will your work be? How frustrated will you grow? We must rinse on a regular basis for the paintbrush to remain supple. We must empty the bag before it becomes full. We can blame the vacuum or blame the paintbrush or blame God, but the problem is ours. How do we clean and reboot our lives? We start each day with God. We forgive others and we forgive ourselves. Take a nap. I saw a woman had a big sign on her shirt at camp meeting, and it said, Jesus took naps. So we have permission. Celebrate Sabbath. That's one reason for Sabbath, to clean the stiffening bristles for the upcoming week. Inhale and exhale a cleansing breath. Go for a walk. Either we take mini vacations and long vacations, or we will lack power. When I was a student at Cal Poly, I would wander off by myself to poke through the tide pools at Montaña de Oro Beach. Number 2, we do not allow the joy robbers to suffocate our flame. And that's one answer to your question. It doesn't matter what goes on in the arena. We're not going to allow them to suffocate our flame. Sometimes they fan that flame. That's good. Other times, not so much. To keep joy alive, we must fiercely guard our joy flame. When it's flickering low, we cup our hands around it. Nobody will steal our joy. Amazingly, 2,400 years ago, Socrates warned, beware the barrenness of a busy life. One of the great mysteries of our age is how, with countless time-saving devices, we find ourselves feeling out of time, out of patience, and out of energy. We may try to fill our joy void with distractions, but unless God's parade, this is referring to a previous chapter, unless God's parade is in us, we experience a death of purpose, a draining of spontaneity, a dearth of wonder. When thousands of pastors were asked how they knew they were not praying enough, the most common response was, I get irritable. Many of us simply are exhausted. SDAs can also stand for sleep-deprived adults, particularly if we have infant children. Being around adults who act like infants is also exhausting. When our joy flame is low, we may experience spiritual chronic fatigue syndrome, which is we learn much about God and grow distant from God. The ultimate joy robber is, of course, us. Too often we submit to the self-talk fallacies of perfection, helplessness, and catastrophic expectations. We confuse the good fight of trusting love with the bad fight of sin. In the epic film Groundhog Day, Phil the weatherman admits, I've come to the end of myself. By the way, that's one of my favorite films, arguably the most spiritual film ever. We can talk after on that. Phil is out of options because he's plugged into himself only. We must keep on plugging in the source of growth and peace and creativity. Guard your joy. It is your very self. We don't do our best. We do our balanced best. I don't know what doing my best means. Is it studying Scripture 10 hours a day? Working out until my arms thicken like tree trunks? Reading 150 books a year? My friend Dillis Brooks told me she had read 113 books last year. I said, wow, good for you. She said, I listened to more than 100 of them. They were audiobooks. She reads them while she's doing work at her house. And so I'm going to be reading this as an audiobook. Something clicked in me in that moment. I said, maybe that would be a good idea. So we're going to come out with the audiobook in a few months. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. The ultimate goal is balanced, healthy discipleship in 5 areas: spiritual, emotional, physical, mental, and social. On a speaking tour in Australia, I was sharing with a group of 10 pastors the idea of balanced best. Afterward, 2 of them approached me and said, "That concept just saved my career. I was on the verge of burnout, but I can measure and do balanced best." Fourth, we keep the fun in the fundamentals. If we don't keep the fun in the fundamentals, all we have left is dementals. I didn't put that in the book. That was an extra just for you. In Mr. Holland's opus, Mr. Holland tries to convince a frustrated clarinetist that she is missing the point of everything. He asserts, playing music is supposed to be fun. It's about heart. It's about feelings, moving people, and something beautiful. And it's not about notes on a page. There's a lot more to the Bible and to following Jesus than words. It's about feelings and moving people and something beautiful and being alive and having fun. We can study doctrine and lose the passion. We can come to prefer the menu to the meal. Too many Adventists do that. But as Nehemiah points out, the joy of the Lord is your strength. Our 12-year-old grandson, Judah, texts Yolanda and me photos of jokes he writes on an LED whiteboard atop his bedroom dresser. Every morning he does this. Here are his latest, at least back when I wrote the book. To the person who stole my limbo bar, how low can you go? A Roman walks into a cafe, holds up 2 fingers, and gets 5 coffees. What do you call a nose with no body? Nobody knows. Say, that's a nice ham you've got there. It would be a shame if someone put an S at the beginning and an E at the end. I'll just wait for that one to drop. There you go. If you get heartburn every time you eat birthday cake, try taking the candles off first. I can imagine someone using those to make a point, maybe even in a book. God loves fun. Tony Campolo writes, there isn't anything frivolous about having fun. Learning how to have fun is one of the most serious subjects in the world. Without fun, marriages don't work. When jobs aren't fun, they become intolerable and dehumanizing. When children aren't fun, they're heartbreaking. When church is not fun, religion becomes a drag. When life is not fun, it is hard to be spiritual. When I was editor of the youth magazine Insight, parents would ask me how they could keep their young people following God. Joy is essential, I tell them. Your children don't care as much if you're right about God as they care to see if you're enjoying the journey. That's the attractive part. Finally, we live with defiant optimism. 3 years after my father died, my mother remarried Jack, a highway engineer from the World Bank. That was when I found out something about my mom. She is a fabulous dancer. I didn't know that for more than 60 years. Well into their 70s, Maurice, my mom, and Jack became the buoyant, shimmering stars of every dance floor, even teaching West Coast swing dancing on jazz cruises. Then suddenly, a stroke felled Jack. For months he lay in bed, partially paralyzed, his chest a pale washboard of bones, as my mother cared for him. They appeared together at a family reunion in Kansas City. Wan and gaunt, Jack shuffled with the distinctive, slow, listing, stuttering gait of a stroke victim. His left hand curled inward like a scorpion's tail. On the afternoon of the second day, my mother had been playing favorite old tunes on one of the keyboards when I noticed her staring at Jack. I was sitting next to him. Leaving the keyboard, she walked purposefully across the floor. "Come on, Jack," she said, extending her hand. "Let's dance." Jack took her hand and stood. Gently, she led him to the center of the floor. He seemed baffled, dazed, tottering. I readied myself to retrieve him. All eyes were on them as the music started up again. My mother began dancing, stepping lightly, sliding, swiveling, bending, smiling, all the while holding his hand. And then the most amazing alteration took place. Jack became transfigured. He watched her with wonder and love. His lips curved up, his eyes glowed, his body straightened and swayed with the beat. He raised his arm, and graceful movement spilled from his fingers like quicksilver. He was dancing through my mother. Followers of Jesus are called to live with defiant optimism for others. We dance joyfully for the woman who has just suffered another miscarriage, for the father who buried his child, for the struggling student, for the jaded, cynical churchgoer who doesn't believe church members are honest. We provide indomitable joy. When those around us sit paralyzed by life's pain, we extend a hand, lift them to their feet, and dance for the true Lord of the dance. Then watch their eyes fill again with life.
Thanks, Chris. I was following along, great jokes, and then you just pulled me in with that final story. So great to hear your words. I'm sure we have a couple of questions, and then we can break and socialize and buy books, and Chris will sign it for you. Any questions from folks about Chris's history? Any anecdotes you'd like to share? There's some people here who have worked around him. And perhaps we should hear a good story about Chris. And of course, if you have any questions about what he does with the Just Love Collective, those are welcome as well. So I want to open it up to the floor and see if you've got any good anecdotes. I'm going to go to Steve because I know you worked with him. You work with him now. And I'm just curious, what was it like working with Chris?
He's a taskmaster. He's so creative. And, reading this book, I wrote a review for it. And it's a hard book to review.
Yeah.
Because it is packed. I mean, every page. And everything is so broad and far-reaching. He narrows it down and makes powerful points. But then you're right off to the next point again. So you can't, it's not a book where you sit down and read it, spend the evening reading it. You read a section, and then you stop and let it sink in. And that might be the only thing you read that evening. And then you come back to it the next evening or the next morning. It's a powerful book. So, and then I work with him. I help him edit Pulse and for the Just Love Collective. And again, he's a powerhouse creatively and in every other way. So it's a pleasure to know him and to work closely with him.
Great. Thanks for that. This book sounds like it should be like the sharing book of the year, right? I was listening to someone telling the story about Pearson, General Conference President Pearson, who really became focused on writing the sharing book of the year, which could sell like 100,000 copies. So, I think that's good.
I would take that.
Yeah. Any questions that you have for Chris? Yeah, Larry, get the mic over to you here.
You know, in a way, you've had several different careers. You've been a teacher, you've been a pastor, you've been a writer, you've been an editor. Is it fair to ask which one was the favorite career?
Oh. No. You know, Larry, I'll use that, I guess. I used to tell my students, never work 1 second for the church. Always work for God. Then you can be employed by the church, or you can be employed by a business. But always work for God. So I've always had the same boss, no matter where I've been. And that made it joyful. You know, I loved every place, everyone. And I was really glad to get out when I did. I'll tell one story connected to it. Let's see. How many names I want to mention here? 1992, I was at Insight working with Lori Peckham, Kim's wife. And we had worked for about 1.5 years on making Insight go digital every other week in 1992. Yeah. Because, I don't know, I just had this feeling that might work, especially for young people. And so, normally I didn't really jump through the hoops. I just went out and did stuff. But this time I decided I'm going to do this right. So I did, and these vice presidents got together, and they decided about a week before we were going to launch that they would not allow us to do that, even though we've gotten permission all the way. And this was, I was more than 7 years into my work there at Insight. And so the next day I got on the phone and I called Union College, and I ended up teaching there. I needed to leave. It was obvious to me. And, you know, for a while I was angry with those VPs. But as I look back, I needed to leave. And this can happen no matter where we are. And here's the analogy that comes to my mind. Because they actually did me a favor. There are two analogies. One is, even though the terrorists brought up enhanced airline security, I don't thank the terrorists. Right? The other analogy is this one. In the body of Christ, there are rear ends. And we all are using our rear ends every day. But you just don't want your rear ends to do your thinking for you. Isn't that an elevated thought?
We need another question. We can't go on.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's live on the internet.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do one more question. Anyone want to? Yeah, sure. We'll do two. Do you have a question too, Azrika? All right, we'll do two here.
You have worked for the church for such a long time, and you know the inner workings of the church. Have you become cynical about this manifestation of the chosen people of God?
Yeah.
And if not, how have you managed to not to be cynical?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. You got the question?
Yes, I do. I'll probably need that mic again, though,
Yeah.
to answer it. Much as some people don't want me to have it. Here we go. Good question. How do you continue to be employed by the church, interact with the church, and not become cynical? And I have many friends who have left the church. Most of us in this room have. I was in San Antonio 10 years ago. I was a correspondent for Spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of a decision there, I have friends who said, that's it, I'm out. What helps me is, once again, to know for whom I'm working. I know who my boss is. And I also know that we are frail and fallible and finite. I'm trying to think of another F to come in there, but I think that'll work. And to expect perfection is really stupid. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to be flawless. Oh, another F. There you go. Yeah. And in fact, we're not going to be flawless even on the new earth. No, we won't be. We're going to make mistakes on the new earth. In a perfect environment, we will make mistakes. And I say hallelujah. We wouldn't have it any other way. You don't want everything all worked out for you. I don't. I want surprises and I want freedom. Freedom is sacred to God. God would rather have us free than have us safe. God would rather have us free than have us saved. So when I think of the new earth and what it means to be new earth people, I walked through the convention center today and I came back and I said to Yolanda, there are so many well-meaning people out there. I mean, sincerely, right? What gives me hope and keeps me from being cynical is focusing on what's central and not peripheral. What's central is Jesus. And Jesus is all the way through this. But I tell a joke at the start, which I'm going to tell now. It's a joke that my friend Gary, sitting in here, said was not funny. I'm telling it anyway because it's in the book. It's not the first time Gary said that to me, by the way. It's children's church, and the speaker has a question for the kids. They're all clustered around. Speaker says, what's furry, small, has a big tail, climbs up trees, and hides nuts? Hands go up all over instantly. But one little guy, he's going to... So the speaker goes over and he says, Jeremy, what's the answer? Jeremy says, well, it sounds like a squirrel, but I know the answer must be Jesus. Do you hear that laughter, Gary? Too many times we want the answer with a capital A without knowing the questions and the stories and the contexts that undergird. You know, when I was teaching in college level, there were students who just wanted me to give the answer, and I would say, you don't know the questions. It's not going to matter to you. You don't know why. So let's find out why it matters. Why does this matter? Why does this life matter? And to me, you know, I'm wearing glasses here. I have two lenses that are spiritual lenses, and these two lenses give me joy. The first one is Jesus, and the second one is the new earth. And I look at life from the perspective of, what would a new earth person do here? You know, our home is not in heaven. We leave heaven and come home to this planet, this place. That's why Christians ought to be the best environmentalists in the world. This is the place. This is our eternal home. That gives me hope and joy, and it keeps me from being cynical. That helps.
All right, one more question. This is from Izrika, one of our great special projects correspondents. She writes Sabbath school commentary and does all kinds of reviews.
Yes. My question is, well, writing is so deeply intimate and personal. Can you sort of walk through your writing process? Not like I write for hours of the day, but like what is happening in your inner world? How does your relationship with God affect your writing? Not in that like it's a Christocentric book, but what does how does your inner world determine what comes out on the paper?
Yeah. So I taught public speaking, one of the courses I taught in college. And of course, many people are petrified to speak. And many people are petrified to write as well. But what I shared with the students is this. You're not speaking and you're not writing to impress people. You're gonna tense up, if that's the case. You're sharing love. That's why. You're sharing love. And so that's the motivation for me, is love. There's no other motivation that matters. There's no other motive that lasts. Love is the only one. And so it's out of love. I also sense a need. Where is my voice going to carry this love in fresh ways? You know? Only my voice. I don't want to go where everybody else is going. I want to go someplace fresh. And so that's also something that comes up. And then I'll share one other. I love stories, as does my master. So here's a story. There is a New York City businessman, and he's driving through upstate New York, which is beautiful, by the way. I hitchhiked across country from Ontario, California to D.C., up to Montreal and back. And one of the most beautiful places, this was quite a while ago, not just recently, in college. And one of the most beautiful places was upstate New York. So this guy was going through this beautiful spot. He was driving, and he came, the road bent around here, and he came upon a big red barn. And on the side of this barn were 5 targets painted in white. And in the center of every target, the very center, was an arrow. And so he screeched to a halt. You know, he got out of the car because standing about 60 feet from the barn was a young boy, 10 or 11 years old, and he was getting set to shoot another arrow. He said, "Hey, excuse me, son, excuse me. How do you do it? How do you hit the bullseye every time?" So the boy looked around. He said, "Okay, mister, I'll tell you." He said, "The first thing I do is I lick my finger and I make sure that the arrows are slicked back. And then I take the arrow, notch it up, and I got my knees shoulder width apart, and I bend them a little bit. I aim the arrow down, then I raise up. I close one eye, and in between heartbeats, I let it fly. And then I walk up and I paint a target around that arrow." The arrow is a great story. Don't try to hit stuff. Build your writing and your speaking around stories. That's what Jesus does all the time. The most memorable are the stories. And so, the stories that are best are those that come from your life. The story about my mom and Jack comes from my life. I was there, I watched it. I wrote it down. And then you make connections with your story. Those are the rings around your stories. But there are stories everywhere. There are stories in films. There are stories in books. There are stories all over. Then you connect them. And then people remember that, you know. I'll give you another example. I heard this great joke about a kid shooting an arrow in the side of a barn, and I decided to make a writing principle out of it. That's my story. My students remember that story. If I just said, work around your stories, they don't remember it as well. But they remember that kid shooting that arrow. Journalists know this saying, get the name of the dog. Details matter. That's why I did all that slicking back stuff with the arrows, right? Just to set you up. So, stories, love, your voice, and need. That's why January 21, I thought, I'm cranking this thing out. Those of you who don't know what I mean, you can talk to me afterward. All right?
That's it for this week in Adventist News and Views. Subscribe for more stories that matter to the Adventist community, and let's keep the conversation going.